Opioid abuse, it's a problem facing the nation, and Wilmington is at the top of the list. The worst city in the country for opioid overdoses, and now the Cape Fear is using Narcan. That's a drug designed to bring people back to life more than ever. WWY's Kirsten Gutierrez explains what it costs you to have this drug on the streets.
It's being called an epidemic. In fact, more than 700 people died in 2015 across the state from an opioid overdose. And according to Gaslight Health, a healthcare company based out of California, nearly 12% of people in Wilmington abuse opioids. Now we're seeing an increase in a drug used to reverse overdoses. In a WWAY special investigation, I dig deeper to find out if Narcan is helping or hurting the crisis.
But we've got to focus on these users.
There have been 3 overdoses in my life that Narcan has saved my life.
But we're in the midst of an epidemic.
In November of 2016, a family's life changed forever.
Where a 2-year-old was killed because somebody using an opioid passed out and ran into the back of the car. Just a horrible situation.
The man charged in the child's death had reportedly been revived 4 separate times by a drug that reverses an opioid overdose.
Currently, we have saved people's lives 50 times since our introduction of our naloxone program back in March of 2016.
It's touted as a miracle drug, known as naloxone or Narcan.
That's somebody's child, that's somebody's daughter, it's somebody's parent, and sometimes they need that extra chance on life in order to go on a different path. And naloxone provides that as an opportunity.
It saves lives, but is it enabling more harm than good?
We can't arrest this situation away. We know that.
It's a predicament Wilmington Police Chief Ralph Evangelist is facing head on.
If they're out there and we're hitting them with naloxone and they don't want to get treatment, they're a danger to themselves and they should be involuntarily committed into some sort of custody to try to get some sort of detox going on and some sort of help.
Community leaders are working together to get this crisis under control. Statistics show Wilmington is the worst city in America for opioid abuse.
We have seen a consistent trend of there being more overdoses per year. The good thing is we're able to reverse a lot more overdoses in the field now since our agency equipped local law enforcement with naloxone.
The North Carolina Harm Reduction Coalition provides police departments across the Cape Fear region with naloxone courtesy of a grant.
Right now, we have spent not a dime by the taxpayers on this, and that's the direction I intend to go.
As for emergency responders, they're supplied through the hospital by its pharmaceutical budget. They say in the past 6 months alone, they've used naloxone nearly 400 times.
An addict is going to use, and we know that. Not giving them Narcan just means that we're increasing the chance of them dying. And as a healthcare provider, I swore an oath to take care of people. So for me, it helps because without it, I probably couldn't save some of those people's lives.
Deputy Chief Mitch Cunningham agrees, but questions what happens after you save their life.
It's doing what it needs to do, but in some ways it's now exposed another problem, which is it's not enough just to save their lives. It's equally or maybe even more important to get them into some kind of long-term treatment.
One of the next steps is solving the disconnect of how to live a productive life after a near-death experience.
I've learned to be really creative about ways to reach out to people. If you'd talked to EMS years ago about resource sheets on how to get treatment, it wasn't something any of us really thought about.
Michael Page knows firsthand how difficult it is. He was revived 3 separate times.
There's a lot of people in the community that would say, you know, once you've used Narcan once, forget about them, it's a wasted cause, or Narcan enables people, they know that they can continue to use. I would say that we don't have a right to judge. We never know who's going to turn their life around and make a difference. And if it wasn't for those multiple reversals, I wouldn't be here.
Page wouldn't be a father, a brother, or an advocate to get others the help they need.
If I had overdosed and not been brought back, I wouldn't have a life today. So naloxone kept me alive until I was ready to make that change.
It's a drug designed to bring people back to life in hopes of a brighter future. Now the challenge is getting addicts to take advantage of tomorrow.
All right, thank you, Kirsten. North Carolina Harm Reduction Coalition Executive Director Robert Childs, he says in the last year they've used Narcan 1,400 times, and about 5,600 community members have used the drug on their loved ones. For more statistics on the growing epidemic, head to WWAYTV3.com. It's a crisis that's sweeping our nation, and one we've been following closely, the opioid epidemic. As you may know, Wilmington is #1 for the opioid abuse in the country. Whether that's heroin or prescription drugs, it's a battle the county continues to fight. But as WWY's Kirsten Gutierrez explains, the stigma surrounding drug addicts is also a large problem, and one that cost the Wilmington mother of 3 her life.
Those who have struggled with drug addiction know just how hard it is to get back on your feet. Whether it's getting a job or trying to find housing, having to write down your past on various applications may affect your future. And for one Wilmington woman's daughter, it was too much to handle.
She was found in her car at 8:30 p.m. that night, dead, with the engine still running.
It's been more than a year since Iris Baker's 40-year-old daughter and mother of 3, Zoe, died of a heroin overdose.
The day she died, March 23, 2016, I saw her at 4 p.m. She was very depressed again, and her words to me were, "Mom, all the rejection has gotten to me."
For years, Zoe struggled with mental health issues.
With being able to accept that she was worthy of being loved, that drove her to addiction problems.
In 2004, Zoe began living on the streets, the beginning of her heroin addiction.
It was very hard for me because people would hear about her being living on the street or being addicted to drugs even before that, and throw out comments to me, "Well, if you'd just been a better parent, she wouldn't be in this situation." I had that numerous times.
Baker had Zoe in and out of treatment centers, doing the best she could to help save her daughter. In 2010, Zoe cleaned up her act and stayed clean until 2015. But during all of those years,
she never could, through all of that time, find a job. She couldn't even be on a lease.
It's a sad reality recovering addict Debbie Eden says is a constant struggle for those trying to turn their lives around. She's been clean for 21 years, but says it was a difficult process.
It's prevented a lot of people who are in recovery or people suffering from substance use disorder being able to find housing, being able to find appropriate work. And the stigma is that once an addict or once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic or an addict.
Eden says having to check a box or write in your criminal history creates an unwanted stigma.
People would judge me for being in recovery from using drugs and alcohol. They didn't understand the mindset and thought that I was a bad person or that I had a moral deficiency.
In reality, it was a sickness Eden and Zoe were both fighting.
I mean, we're compassionate to people who have diabetes. We're compassionate to people who have heart disease. Why are we so disgruntled towards people who have drug addiction? It's a disease also.
But for Zoe, she couldn't face the constant rejection.
I think all of the rejection contributed strongly to her feeling of unworthiness. She did not like who she was. She did not like what she had become and knew that there was a lot of stigma.
On her last day, Zoe told her mother,
"And I really just don't see a reason to keep trying because nobody will give me a chance to do what they tell me I should be doing."
People closing their doors before giving her a chance. Eden says it's a part of the growing opioid crisis that needs to be addressed.
Just because I have that in my past doesn't necessarily mean that that's who I am today.
And as for Baker,
as far as societally, I really believe we need more accessible mental health resources, because I believe that a lot of the folks who become addicted are doing so because they are seeking that feeling of normalcy and worthiness of acceptance.
while Iris Baker asked society for more accessible mental health resources, Debbie Eden is asking for more people to show compassion for those who are struggling and those who have struggled. Clearing the stigma, Eden says, is just another step in the fight against the opioid crisis.
All right, thank you, Kirsten. We know the opioid abuse is a huge problem across the Cape Fear. And while there are task forces, quick response teams, health organizations, and other various efforts that are being made to combat the epidemic, another large issue is actually getting into rehab. In a WWAY investigation, Kirsten Gutierrez digs deeper to break down the challenges those seeking help are facing. Kirsten, why is it so hard to get clean?
Amanda, there are numerous rules and restrictions that keep people who want and need help from getting it, ranging from mental health issues to a criminal record. A slight hiccup might not make you eligible for treatment, not to mention a shortage of beds, lack of transportation to rehab facilities, and knowledge of what else is out there.
And I remember like begging the nurse, like in tears, like saying, please, it's Friday night, like you can't do this to me. I'm not going to make it, I'm not going to stay sober.
It took recovering addict Michael Page 3 tries to finally get the help he was seeking. The first challenge, health insurance, something Page didn't have, which left him with state-funded options like the Harbor.
There's too much of a need.
A rehab facility with a limited number of beds in the midst of an epidemic, which is the second challenge.
Also, what we see is massively long waiting lists for the ones that are free or severely discounted. And so some people are waiting 6 months to get in there. That 6 months, you're trying to keep your kid alive until that place has a bed.
Another challenge Robert Childs with the North Carolina Harm Reduction Coalition says is whether you qualify.
So there's all these barriers being thrown at folks, and they want to get care, but they can't because of a criminal record, because of a mental health diagnosis, because they don't have health care. And then we as a society are screaming at them to get care, and they're disqualified from all our care services. So that is a major problem.
A problem Page faced over several months.
That window, I'd say you've got at maximum like 72 hours from when somebody says, I want to get help, where you need to jump on it and get them help. Otherwise, they fall back into the grips of that addiction.
Which is exactly what Page did.
From the first time to when I actually got into the Harbor and got detox, I got 4 felonies, so I was committing crimes, I was hurting the community.
Page also overdosed and was revived by naloxone several times. It took him nearly 9 months to get into rehab.
It takes a lot for somebody to reach out and ask for help.
When they do and don't get the help they seek,
I held up my end of the deal and did what I was asked to do, and I just wanted to give up.
Leaving those with the feeling of rejection and, like Page, back to addiction.
And since they can't get into drug treatment, they continue their drug use, potentially overdose, potentially hurt people they love, potentially commit crimes because they have no other option. And that's where we as a society have failed a lot of our civilians. And to me, that is heartbreaking.
Page says another challenge in the system of getting and remaining clean is the lack of knowledge about resources available in the community.
It took several times to get in, and then while I was there, again, the connection with the next piece wasn't really in place. And that's an important component because, yeah, you detox somebody, but then what?
Follow-up care, Page says, may have helped him get clean earlier.
Why can't someone then follow up with them? And say, hey, are you familiar with the fact that there's some support groups in your community that you could go to tonight or tomorrow? Here's another type of resource that you can utilize until this bed opens up, versus just call back tomorrow between 8 and 8:30. Thank you, click.
Aside from the lack of health insurance, beds, transportation to and from the limited rehab centers in the area, and eligibility requirements to even get help, there's also a lack of centers for women. Another problem Page says needs to be addressed.
People, again, they will say things like, well, women are more resourceful. They don't tend to seek help. They don't ask for treatment. And I feel like that's unjust and incorrect.
While community members, leaders, and organizations are coming together to fight the growing epidemic, Page says getting people the help they need is the first step in making a real difference.
Today I pay taxes. I'm a father. I'm a brother. I'm a good citizen. I do a lot of outreach work. You never know.
To emphasize how serious of a problem the opioid epidemic is, just yesterday, Judge Ola Lewis hand-delivered a letter to Governor Cooper asking him to declare a public health emergency, which would bring more awareness to the community. Trillium Health Resources is also planning to open a new rehab facility in Wilmington called The Healing Place with more than 100 beds. But again, that's just for men. Amanda?